before you start. Oh, you're already recording?
I just hit it. If you want me to pause it, I can. Go. So first I want to start by introducing everyone and letting you know who all is in the room. So first I'll introduce Brandi Spinks. She is an addiction counselor. She works at Sober Living America. She also does private addiction counseling. And she's been a peer support specialist for Favor and at Phoenix Center. Also have with us Lorenzo Powers. He's a homelessness specialist from Home Again, and he's also a Reverend at Kingdom Keys. We have Talisha Ratliff, who is a pharmacist and a teacher at Presbyterian College, and she's had a specialty in addiction medicine. We have Tom Carver, who's a former Spartanburg police counter-terrorism, homeland terrorism, and other criminal stuff in the FBI. And I am Emily Williams. I am a professor here at USC Upstate, and I also am the Intensive Family Services Supervisor over at the Department of Mental Health. And this program is aimed at working with addiction and conduct disorder through the Department of Mental Health. So I thought we'd start this panel discussion by talking a little bit about some of the myths about substance use. And so what I want to do is I'm going to present some of these myths, and as students, you guys can chime in with any ones that you have heard as well as we go through this panel discussion, because the whole point is to have the conversation. So the first myth about substance use that I wanted to bring to the panel was that drug addiction is a voluntary behavior. And so I'm going to turn it over to you guys to kind of talk about that, including myself, and I'll add to this conversation. But I want to give y'all all an opportunity to kind of chat.
So I guess I can start it. So with this myth, whenever you think about voluntary behavior, it is a voluntary choice. But I always tell my students that, the only difference right now is that you have not tried it and they have. And so that doesn't make you better than them or anything like that because they made a different choice from you. And so I used to take students on rotation because I wanted them to know that like addiction has no face and there's no stereotype that goes with addiction. Anybody can be affected by addiction. And so just realizing that once that choice is made, then it becomes something their brain changes. And so it's not just like, oh, well, you can just choose to stop, just like you chose to do it. Just knowing that it is a lot harder to stop once that behavior has started.
And just to kind of add to that a little bit, addiction, the cravings for substances happen outside of conscious awareness. So before you ever come across a substance, the craving has already happened, and in fact, a recurrence for substance use happens long before you actually use a substance. So you'll notice it as well, not you, but maybe people with addiction will notice it as increases in tension, more fighting, struggling a little bit more, maybe having difficulties with their family or their work. And so this will happen weeks to months before the actual recurrence happens, meaning, and recurrence being using a substance again after a period of time of absence. The next myth I'm going to throw out there is that willpower is all you need to beat addiction. And I'm gonna pull Mr. Lorenzo in on this one.
I had a feeling that you would. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. And this is a tough one, a challenging one that I want to represent all clergy, but I guess I'm doing it tonight. But willpower, and I think that's something that the church in general faces as a difficult topic. That is a moral thing, like a moral failure. Like you're a bad person if you use. I mean, and then if you're a good person, if you want to be good, if you want to be a Christian or whatever it may be, then you can choose not to do it. But this being in the field for 10 years of addiction, that's simply not true. That is very difficult. That once you are suffering for substance use disorder, to snap out of it, or just to be a good person, all of a sudden you're not addicted anymore. It takes professional help. It takes buy-in as well. You have to buy into the treatment. So it's definitely not just willpower that you can just overcome it. But I think eventually you get tools with professional help. You learn how to cope, and there's certain coping strategies that are put in place. But it's not as simple as getting into it and getting out of it. So it's definitely a process. And that would be my feedback. But then I think the church has to become more educated with the field of addiction as well, and not treat it as some kind of spiritual condition, but just also treating the whole person.
Well, addiction should be cured after one visit, right, guys?
Sure.
So one
How
time you
much-
go into treatment, right, the addiction is just done. Tom, you were gonna say something. Go ahead, man.
Well, no, I was just going to ask a question as to how much is contributed to running away, or I'm not sure the term. I know I've known a lot of people in my time that have had this affliction thrust upon them, and I've had them say sometimes that they're just trying to get away or trying to run from the problems or that type of thing. And I'm just wondering, from a psychological standpoint, how does that equate, or does it?
The need to run away?
Yes.
I mean, I think substance use in general is an escape from reality. I mean, so, I mean, obviously there's something painful. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit later more in detail, but it's like upward of 75% of people with addiction issues have a history of trauma, meaning that something happened in their life where it was so overwhelming that they couldn't cope. And what do you do when you can't cope? You avoid it, right? So, I mean, it's a common practice to try to avoid those things that feel overwhelming to us. And substance use is just one of those strategies. It's a coping skill for many who don't have better coping skills that lead to better results.
Right. And going back to what Lorenzo said, I think what happens a lot of times in that faith-based setting, I mean, I've witnessed it with my own eyes, that people who don't understand something, they reject it or treat it differently, and I think that's where the education process has to come in. You have to have enough people who want to care about it to educate people.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brandi, it takes one time through treatment for it to work, right? Like if you don't get it the first time, then you just don't have it together, right?
No, I mean, it can take multiple times of going to treatment. Just to introduce myself, my name is Brandi. I'm a person in long-term recovery from an alcohol and opioid use disorder since March 11th, 2011. And what that means for me is I haven't had any mood or mind altering substances since then. And because of that, I get to be a mother to my children. I get to be a grandmother. I get to be a productive member of society. But I think addiction is a very progressive disease. Mine didn't, start out with me sticking a needle in my arm by any means. It definitely progressed throughout the years. And 20 years ago, when I started struggling with alcoholism and addiction, there was a lot less known and a lot less resources that there are today. And my family really did depend a lot on the church in the beginning of my addiction. And, not to say that it was the church's fault, but, they didn't really understand a lot about addiction. So it did seem like a moral failing to them. And, for me, addiction wasn't a choice. If I had a choice in it, that would not be what I would have chosen for myself. And I like what Miss Emily said, there's many factors. There's the genetic component, there's the environmental, social factors, there's the trauma. All kinds of things can contribute to having this disease. Not delaying the use of alcohol till an older age, before my brain was fully developed, probably played a part in that as well. But I think too, just to be certain that, regardless of willpower, I do believe that people, and I wouldn't say religion and spirituality are two different things, but, people of faith, a lot of times, that's something that really can help someone in their recovery. So it can be a double-edged sword, right? So it could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing. Because I know a lot of people that rely on church for their sobriety. I know a lot of people that spirituality plays a big role in the process of recovery. And I just wanted to make that statement too about when we're talking about faith-based attitudes and so forth. But definitely no. Treatment the first time did not work for me. And I'm a product of the 80s. I'm a product of the Just Say No campaign by Nancy Reagan. And in the world that I live in of active addiction, there's no such thing as just say no. There's cravings and there's, the sense like Miss Emily was talking about to use substances to self-medicate and to avoid and to hide and to isolate and not face certain things. So I'll stop right there. I'm talking too long.
Thank you, Brandi. Talisha, I saw your hand up.
No, I was just giving an applause to Brandi.
Oh, okay. Okay. Got it. Yeah, absolutely. Another myth I wanted to kind of address was that people who lose their kids because of a drug use problem obviously don't love their kids. And I want to bring that one to highlight just because Brandi said that she could be a productive mother. So can anyone talk on this point? This is a big one I hear.
Guy.
Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
All I said was this was a big one. This is a big one that I hear.
Yeah,
so,
I hate to be the bad guy, but I have witnessed when I was a police officer how a husband and wife would either get high in their car or they would get high at home and ignore their kids. And it certainly gave you the feeling of that they didn't really care. But having a degree in psychology myself, you have to kind of sort of realize that people are not perfect, and nor are you could strive to be perfect, but that's about the extent of it. And it's unfortunate though in the system when, especially if somebody's out and about and they get high and have their kids in the car and they're just kind of comatose, it's not a good situation, and it leaves you a bad feeling about mankind, and although it's just one situation, but I've seen it over and over and over again in different situations. And as a law enforcement officer, it's very difficult to put those pieces together. Hey, I need to help these people when, I've got to move on to the next situation, and I have to do what I have to do. But you look back over those things and you think, well, yeah, it would, had I known those people, it might be different. But a lot of times you don't know the people. You've seen them 5 minutes for the first time in your life, and you don't really know what struggles they're going through and what their understanding of things are. And but by no means have I ever thought that somebody don't care about their kids, because people will fight you over their kids, whether they're sane or insane or high or not high. People love their kids. They just they may show it a little bit differently than what I may understand or what somebody else may understand, but people love their kids.
So I have a story that I use for this one, Tom, when I'm trying to help people understand kind of what's going on. So when I was a little kid, I don't know, y'all did this, but I would sit on the floor and watch TV because that's just where the kids sat with their popcorn bowl or whatever. And my mom would be in the kitchen making dinner or maybe spaghetti, because I love spaghetti and so does she. So she'd be in there. And this was back when Friday nights would have like Steve Urkel and stuff on it. Y'all remember? Yeah, you'd be glued to the TV, right? Eyes glued to the TV, not turn off. You are riveted. And mom would yell, and y'all, I love spaghetti. All right, I love it. Mom would yell for dinner, and I didn't hear a word she said. Not one word. I was into my TV, eyes on it. And so even though I love my spaghetti, because I was hyper focused on what was going on the TV, I was missing my opportunity. Did it mean that I love spaghetti less? Absolutely not. Did it mean that my attentions were elsewhere? Absolutely. And does that mean that sometimes that leads to the spaghetti being gone and there being less in the pot, or my brothers and sisters didn't save me no sauce? Yes, all of that. There's stuff that you miss out on. And yes, there's sometimes neglect, or sometimes even when I finally did get the spaghetti and then I get mad because the spaghetti gone, even though it's my fault, all of those still are the same things that are going on with addiction. It is the hyper focus on one thing that keeps you from being able to see the other things in your life. It is not that the love is gone, it's that the brain is locked in to that one reinforcer, that one thing in your life. And that's my story, yeah. The last one I wanted to address is that it's easy to pick an addict out of a crowd. I think, Talisha, you started to talk about the lack of stereotypes or the not being true and those types of things. Can you talk on that a little bit?
Sure. So whenever I talk to my students and they would come to the clinic, like they all kind of have like their own perception of what they think the patients are going to look like. And without me prompting them or, saying anything to influence them, they all end up saying the same thing of, oh, these are regular people just like me. I would have never guessed that this person was struggling with addiction. And so then I get to tell them, yeah, that's why I have you here, so that we can have more people out in the community who have that same mindset and who have that stereotype that was in their head broken down. And so they can see people for just who they are, just people. Like there's no face. It can affect anybody.
And I just want to throw a little additional thing out there, y'all. I have treated doctors, guidance counselors, police officers. I mean, there's a number of different types. So you don't know by looking at somebody or even like how well they're doing in life, whether there's an addiction issue, because a lot of times people do learn how to be functioning addicts. So I want to go next into talking about like some of the risk factors for addiction. So I think I'm just going to kind of talk about this briefly and then have y'all add to it as we talk. So I know we mentioned trauma, and like 75% of those in addiction treatment have a history of some kind of abuse. And the reason for this can be they're self-medicating for that trauma response. It can be neglect and abuse that leave this sense of lack of connection. It can also be that substances provide a sense of synthetic connection. So when people have abuses in their lives, there's a disconnect from either a family unit or a loved one or other types of things. So those substances create that euphoric feeling that can help people to almost feel like this fake connection to others that kind of replace those real connections. So addiction is a disease of connection. Family history of addiction. Were you going to say something? I'm sorry. No. Family history of addiction. And a lot of people, especially some of the kids that I have worked with, I'll hear from them that they swear that they will never be like their parents because they don't want to pick up the same habits, and they're also smoking tons of marijuana and following the exact same pathways. And what's happening in these situations is that they are occupying so much of their mental space about how their parents have hurt them and all these other things that they are actually focused on that addiction the same way a person who had an addiction would. And then when they start to use, it's almost like they're coming home. Like they recognize the patterns of behavior. It feels like this is where they're supposed to be. It's comfortable. It's real to them. So even though people will say, I never, ever want to be like that family member, the more they think about how they don't want to be like the family member, the more, in fact, they actually become like the family member. Another reason would be poverty. Poverty is a risk factor for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's because there's a lack of parental supervision as the parent struggles to make ends meet. Sometimes it's related to perpetual stress. Sometimes it's just poor nutrition, lack of access to self-care and other healthcare resources, which would teach the person to value their body and have healthy coping skills. And then finally, drug availability. I always say that if you hang out in a barbershop long enough, you're bound to get a haircut. So if you have tons and tons of peers that are smoking and drinking and using different substances, like you may walk into that situation with all of this willpower, like it's not going to be me, I'm not going to do it. But the longer you hang in that circle, the more you start to normalize the behavior, and it just becomes something that you see frequently. So I'm going to turn it over back to y'all. That was the presentation of the information, to see if you guys have anything you want to add to that.
I think you can see it so much, Emily. Just growing up, I grew up in low income in Greenville. So I grew up in a lot of these, bad neighborhoods. I guess they would call them low income in Greenville. And you would see it so much. Whereas people using drugs, you thought it was like almost like a norm. And therefore it took, people didn't take it as seriously. Then when you grow up, let's say high school to college, you may come back home, you see some of those same friends, they may not even recognize you, and it's sad. And I would come home from school, the people that I hung out with when I was elementary to middle school, either they were murdered, passed away, but it was always due to drugs. So I lost probably 5 of my close friends to substance abuse, and my father as well. So, and my father would do it in the home right in front of me when he would talk to me. So I think sometimes what you see can become a norm, even though it's taking you out and the people that's connected to you as well.
Absolutely. So I think, Tom, you were going to talk about some of the drugs of abuse. what's out there, what you've seen, what you've run into.
Yes. Well, fentanyl is the big thing right now. It's so powerful, and then there's heroin and opiates and morphine and stimulants, depressants. The thing about fentanyl, though, is it seems like I spent my first 5 years in Oklahoma City when I became an FBI agent, and it was a big time for the latest and greatest craze was methamphetamine, and I'm sorry, not methamphetamine, but methamphetamine, and I was on a team that we went around um, and worked some of those labs, and literally in some neighborhoods it was every other house had a lab in it, and it was such a deadly thing that if moisture hit it the wrong way, or if they didn't cook it just right, I mean, it was a very dangerous time for not just the user, the seller, and the law enforcement as well. So, but fentanyl is a little bit different because it's so deadly. Somebody can take a little bit too much and not make it through the night. And of course, the opioid epidemic in the country is really bad, and even some doctors exacerbate that by continuing to write prescriptions. But people also take prescription pads. I mean, I got an education in how people can take a prescription pad and basically make a new prescription pad with the right kind of printer, the right kind of computer, those types of things, and they can even put the watermark on it to make it look real. And so that's it's definitely an education. Cocaine has always been around. There's a new thing out that just started happening after 9/11 in the country. It's called COT. And at first, nobody really knew what to do about it. And now I think it's on the list to be a felony if you have enough of it, if you're distributing enough of it. The depressants, the vaping now they're using what they call honey butane oil with the marijuana, the THC. And marijuana is a whole nother story. I mean, Denver, they legalized it, and but they tax it and they sell it, but they still have that criminal element that still tries to use it illegally because they don't want to go by the rules. So, like I say, I'm not trying to be the bad guy. I'm just the bearer of I'm just the messenger, I guess. So.
Yeah. So I thought we would talk a little bit about what kind of things you're seeing with the coronavirus environment, how that is changing the landscape of substance use and abuse, what you guys are seeing in your areas and what you know.
Well, unfortunately for me, I see it firsthand. My brother-in-law is addicted to meth, and me and my husband moved out of this house that we had, and we told him he could stay there for a few days, to kind of get himself together again. And anyway, it turned out into this big ordeal. And I used to work for a medication assisted treatment program, and my boss has a nonprofit organization called Challenges Inc. And we give out like clean equipment like syringes, Narcan, boilers, anything like that. And so it ended up where the police had to go in. My father-in-law had to get the police to go in to where my brother-in-law was staying, and there was like 23 people staying there in the house. But in the meantime, because my boss, they've been working limitedly, so people haven't had access a lot to the syringe service program. So I would have to go up there and get clean supplies and Narcan and take it, you know, to my brother-in-law, because these people were there doing heroin. And I know for a fact, out of the 23 people within the past 3 months, that there were 9 overdoses. And because they had Narcan, they were able to bring them back. But just the isolation, and that's just within like 23 people within like 3 months, a little group of meth users and heroin users, and having 9 overdoses that I knew about, that I was told about, and then wanting more Narcan. I think that kind of speaks to, you know, lack of people having that social connection, which is so, so important for people in recovery. I think that's, you know, one part of it. I'm sure other people would like to put their input. I think Talisha had some good information, didn't you?
Yeah, that was like the perfect lead in. Thank you. So DHEC reported that back in May of this year that the EMS responded to 915 suspected opioid overdoses in South Carolina alone. And so that was nearly double the amount that was reported in 2019. And so whenever the pandemic first, started, I was still working in the clinic setting, and we saw the rise in patients needing Narcan, and we give it to them as much as they need, like as much as you need. If you needed to give it to someone else, that was fine too. If someone wanted to come in, that was fine. But just seeing the patients, they're being bored. That was a big thing that we heard, bored. I don't have anything to do. I can't go anywhere. I can't see my friends. And so that social interaction that Brandi spoke about, I think is huge, huge thing.
So in the adolescent population, which is the population that I work with substance use and mental health, what I'm seeing is, just from my own perspective and my own viewpoint, is that the lack of eyes on the students during the summer and through the COVID has escalated the amount of substance use. So basically, in the past, the teachers would have noticed something was awry, or some of the school officials would have noticed something was going on. And rather than having somebody alerting people's attention to it, it's pretty much just kind of gone on over the summer and has escalated and gotten worse. Now, as the students are now returning back to school, so what we're seeing is a huge influx of new people, new patients coming in, and now their problems have escalated to a really problematic space. Another thing that I'm seeing is that there were no repercussions. So during the coronavirus, usually what would happen is if there was suspected substance use in the home, or that there was suspected that the kid might be using, like DSS would have been called, or DJJ might have intervened with substance use in the school, and there would have been some court order referral to substance use treatment. But what we have found is that the courts have gotten backed up in Spartanburg County. The DSS cases have not had enough eyes, and for some families, they're like, you don't have these monkeys on your back, but on the back end of that is that you've got all these growing problems that are not being attended to, and those systems that are in place to kind of address these issues are not as available as they once were. So we are actually predicting a large increase in the number of adolescent substance use problems that we see for the next year, maybe two. So I would like to also kind of turn some time over to some of the students and to check in to see if you guys have any questions, anything that you specifically want to know about that we have already talked about, or just some questions that you might have for our panelists.
Hi, I'm Cheyenne. It says Elizabeth, but that's my first name. I do have a question. So I was just wondering if you could tell me like the specifics of like what the main challenges that substance abusers face themselves. Like what are some things that affect them directly, I guess? Like what are, I don't know. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
What are the problems with substance use?
No,
Is that
like
what you're asking?
for an abuser, what would be like some of the problems that what are some of the symptoms that they have, I guess, is more my question.
Well, actually, there are specific symptoms, so that if you, that there's actually like diagnostic criteria for a substance use disorder. So there are specific things that you can look for to know whether, because we recognize that there's a difference between recreational use that turns into later to an addiction, right? So sometimes people do use on occasion and it doesn't turn into anything, and sometimes people use and it turns into something big. And you really can't know how much your body can tolerate before that happens. It just, when it happens, it happens. Your brain just kind of switches over and it says, we now are dependent on this substance and this is what we crave. So I'll actually go through those symptoms with you so that you can kind of hear them and know them. So the first one is that there's like hazardous use. And what that means is that you're using in a way that is dangerous to yourself. Maybe you've overdosed, driven under the influence, blacked out, things like that. The second one is social or interpersonal problems. So substances that cause relationship problems. Maybe you're fighting with your boyfriend or girlfriend a lot. Maybe it's causing you problems with your family. Another one would be the neglected major roles. So this means that maybe you're not attending school the way that you had planned to. Maybe you're not going to work. Maybe you're not keeping up with your housework. Just basically your major roles that you're supposed to fill, you're not meeting them the way that you once did. Another symptom is withdrawal, and every substance has different withdrawal symptoms depending on what substance you're using. Some withdrawal symptoms, mostly the depressants, so like alcohol, Xanax, or the benzodiazepines in general, opiates, these can be almost medically unsafe to withdraw from without the care of a doctor if you've become dependent on them. But other withdrawal symptoms, like let's say for marijuana, would be like irritability, angry outburst, restlessness, not eating or not being able to eat. So whatever a drug gives you, it also takes away. So if you feel euphoric, it's going to make you feel dysphoric, right? So it's always a balance between the two. Another one will be tolerance. So as your brain adjusts to having a substance in your system, what is happening is that your brain says, whoa, we don't need to produce as much because the environment's giving it to us. Thank you. And so it shuts off those natural chemicals it produces. So you do that for a period of time and your brain habituates at that level, meaning like, we are creatures of habit. The brain says, you've done this enough. All right, we've learned this is what our environment is. We adapt, right? That's what we do. And so the brain adapts to these substances because it wants to feel normal, even if you don't. So once you stop bringing in the substance, suddenly you don't have these chemicals in your brain that you once had that helped you to feel good. So when you build tolerance, contrary to some people's belief, building tolerance is not a good thing. So the next one is using larger amounts for a longer period of time. So starting to need more of a substance to get the same effect. Repeated attempts to control use or quit. So this means that you keep trying to say, hey, I'm going to cut back, I'm not going to do as much, or maybe you even stop for a month and then you're right back to doing the same thing and at the same frequency and rate. Much time spent using, and this one is you spend a lot of time looking for the substance, preparing for the substance, calling people for the substance. It occupies a big space in your life and how much time it consumes in your world. Physical or psychological problems. So let's say that you already have anxiety or you have like breathing problems or other types of things. And so by using, you actually make these worse. Sometimes it's like giving up activities like going to a family function or skipping class or other types of things that you would normally do. And then finally, it's a craving. And cravings are not just like, some people think that cravings have to be this super powerful, like jonesing kind of experience, but it's not. Craving can be just a thought that goes through your mind that says, oh man, I really need a blunt right now. That's a craving. That's showing up. And what's really happening is your body's responding to a reduction in the substance. And so it's sending you messages out that maybe you need to fix that. And so you'll get intrusive thoughts or feelings, or you'll feel funky or anxious or other types of things that indicate to you that you might need that substance. Did that answer your question? Or did I tell you a whole lot more than you wanted to know?
It was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions that we have as of right now?
I do. I have a question. I guess everyone can answer this question, but I was going to ask, what are the like strengths and weaknesses that you see with people who suffer from addiction?
What was the question?
Strengths and weaknesses of people who suffer from addiction. Are you meaning like weaknesses in terms of like what they still struggle with while they're in addiction and the strengths they have while they're in addiction? Or you mean like while they're working through their addiction, some of the strengths they pull from?
Right, like while they're working through it, the process.
Does anybody else want to take this question? Okay, so basically, like there are specific like protective factors for addiction. So while they're working on their addiction, what we do is we try to increase those protective factors as much as possible. That is to increase like self-discipline. So what was once unconscious, we try to bring to the conscious. So like those cravings that happen underneath their awareness, we try to make them more aware. So when you feel this tension rising and then you have that thought, like you need to be aware of some of these things, and then you need to have the discipline to incorporate certain skills. So that's one of the things that they kind of work on in therapy, is learning that discipline to recognize their own internal responses and their own thought patterns in order to adjust them and number one, accept them because they're going to happen, and not pretend like they're not happening, and not pretend like they're not happening and happening strongly, and then figure out what to do about those. And that is like whether it's devising a plan or coming up with certain strategies. And strategies can be anything from, when I see that show up, I'm going to take a hot shower. When I see that show up, I'm going to call a friend and I'm not getting off this phone until after that urge has passed. I mean, there's a number of different ways people can learn to manage this disease, the same way you would if you would manage like diabetes or Russian sugar. Oh, there's a spike in my sugar. What do I need to do? This is the process that I take. And we don't treat it any differently. We just have a different set of strategies for dealing with it. The other strengths that we try to work with is that attachment piece. So I think Brandi mentioned that attachment in recovery is such a big deal, because that is what's going on, is that people lose their connection to other people. So that is a big part of addiction to begin with. So people who have had history of trauma or mental illness or some other, they don't have that same sense of connection. So they build this fake one, right? And so these drugs that you pair, anything that fires together, anything that wires together, fires together in the brain. So if you pair this euphoric feeling with this friend of yours that is always high, every time you see that friend, you will feel like that friend makes you euphoric and that's your buddy. That's the fake connection that I'm talking about. So as we're doing that, like, we have got to figure out a way to make those connections with positive peers. That is why we have favor. That is why we have therapists. That is why we try to connect people with their community. The more connected they are, the less risk that this will be an ongoing issue. Other things are like goal-driven behavior. So like, the more you start to plan out, okay, so what do I want? What do I want with my life? And what are these steps to get to this? So if I have a plan in place and I know what I need to do, then my thoughts, like that little Emily watching the TV channel, I can get them to watch a new channel and set those goals to get to what that is, rather than the substance. Other types of things would be some of the strengths that I see come out of people in general who have been through substance use is, they are some of the best people I have ever met. I'm not even kidding. They have the biggest hearts and they understand the struggle and the most empathy of anybody, because they really know what it's like to lose everything and have to build their way back up. And so they are easily able to recognize people who are struggling. They're great people like Brandi is, who like all they want to do is give back to the community of the people that she knows. I mean, because she knows, right? And then the weaknesses. Let's talk about weaknesses. I don't know. I've talked a lot. Y'all sure you don't want to take part of this?
I think a weakness can be lack of family support. I mean, if we want to break it down in strengths and weaknesses, having family support, it can be a strength, and not having a family support can be a weakness. Not having that like we talked about, spiritual component or some type of religious, faith-based support there, because in recovery, and people that's in recovery, people that I know in the profession, of what I've seen is, if they have some type of spiritual component and some type of religious component in there, it helps them with their recovery as well. And studies have shown that. So I would say just knowing what resources that are out there for you, or not knowing, that can be a weakness as well, or strength, just having support, period.
Another weakness that I can think of is that sense of like fake competence that I've seen in some people. So a lot of people in recovery, they'll get to a certain stage and they're like, I got this, it's done, I hadn't used in a month, we good. And then they get too confident in their own ability and they start hanging out with the people they used to hang out with before, not realizing that that person is a trigger. All right, so I don't know what y'all know about triggers, but let me kind of explain this. I also have a story for the way that I try to explain triggers. So if y'all like lemons, any of y'all like lemons?
Sure.
Have y'all ever eaten them like by themselves?
Very sour.
Are they really sour? So
Had
is
a
your
bit of-
mouth, did your mouth start puckering and watering at the discussion of lemons at all?
Not really, because some lemons can be sweet.
Okay, all right. So well, maybe that didn't work for this one. How about this? Have any of y'all ever had to go to the bathroom pretty bad And then as soon as you saw the bathroom, like it's all of a sudden you felt like you were going to pee your pants. Have you ever had that? I know I have a number of times, right? You might even get a little drizzle sometimes. You're like, what? Because you see it, right? So your body responds to seeing something. It sees the toilet. They're like, yep, we can let it go. We can let it go, guys. It's time. So your body is responding to just an image. Like you're not sitting down, you're not relaxing your body yet. You're just seeing the toilet and bam, now it's like a rush to let go. Well, triggers for substance use are exactly the same thing. You see that old friend of yours that you used to use with, and all of a sudden, guess what? Bam, there's the thoughts of all the substances. It happens just like that. And it doesn't always happen with you being aware of it. So, I mean, it makes sense that if you do something over and over and over again, that you might, I mean, we talk about it in recovery, you avoid old friends, old places, and old habits so that they don't trigger those responses in you, because you have to recognize that, again, things that fire together, wire together. And if you get on that neural pathway, yeah, I don't know if y'all studied the brain yet or not, but if you get on that little pathway, once you're on that road, I mean, you're on that road. So, I mean, you can obviously use some skills to get through that, but why put yourself in such a situation that would trigger that? And really, use is really just a building of tension. So you expose yourself to this trigger and then this trigger and then this trigger. Some people need 3, some people need 5, some people need 10, wherever they're at in their recovery. And then bam, it's just guaranteed, because you no longer have it's not voluntary behavior. It is, you are on that road and your behavior is going to take that path. Did that answer your question, or do you have others?
Sorry, I was jotting down some more notes. Yes, that answered my question. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions they would like to ask?
I have a question. My question is, how quickly can someone develop a substance abuse?
Would y'all like to talk about that?
I don't think there's a timetable on it. I think it's, I do think it's for me, a progressive disease. And, I think people are of this thought that, someone has to hit rock bottom before they can find recovery. And that's just not the case anymore. Like, it's now there's ways to intervene with someone much earlier, before their substance use progresses to, something really bad, death, prison, whatever. But I don't think there's like an exact, each individual is different, right? Each individual has different life circumstances, and there's multiple pathways to finding recovery. And so I don't know. I don't think that there is any kind of particular time limit on that. Do you guys agree? Or
I don't think there's any particular time frame on it. I think it does depend on the substance and the brain chemistry of that person. So if you've had a family history of addiction, then your brain is more primed to have a substance use disorder, which means that you are more likely to develop a substance use disorder quicker than somebody who, say, has never had a family history. There are certain substances like opiates, methamphetamines, cocaine that are more addictive than others that will cause you to be addicted quicker. but it really, really just depends. And the thing is, you never know like what your level is and how much you can use before getting addicted. And to that point too, we were talking about tolerance and how much you can use to get addicted. The other thing that you have to remember too is like as tolerance builds for a substance, like it'll feel like you're not, I mean, you're not nearly as messed up or high, but your affinity doesn't necessarily change. And what I mean by affinity is that your brain can take so much of a substance, right? Without it like shutting things happening, shutting down certain things, right? So as your tolerance builds, you don't feel it as much to be able to recognize when there's too much of something in your system. So you can feel perfectly normal and overdose. So you have to kind of remember that too. So even though that you may not feel that messed up, these things can be happening and you wouldn't even realize it. I did want to make some space for Tom to talk a little bit about some of the crime and other kind of issues that arise from substance use and some of the things, especially as it relates to college students and like that age range.
Sure. One of the big things I've seen in law enforcement over my time is domestic violence. It's kind of sort of one of those things that everything starts out cool and everything's great, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong and it goes really wrong. And so that's one of the main things that happen. But there are also people who are on some sort of path or journey, and they resort to violent crime. I mean, I think everybody would agree that that somebody who is addicted has to find the substance that they're looking for, and it's very costly, and it's not cheap. So people resort to breaking and entering, they resort to bank robberies, in more extreme cases, violent home invasions, stealing from family members. It's just a never-ending cycle of crime and violence. And I mean, these are extreme cases, of course, but you also have gang violence, murders, violent assaults, looting, destruction of property. I mean, these are the very extreme cases. I mean, it's kind of sort of like addicts kind of have a different. Some of them when they use, they love people, and some of them when they use, they are very destructive. And at least that's been my experience from a law enforcement standpoint. And so these are the kind of things. And then there's the whole flip side to it, that if you're working a criminal organization that does these things to support their habits, or to, and a habit could be manufacturing and selling as well. We always used to say that the people who don't get caught are the people who don't use. When people use, they make wrong decisions about business, and that's how they get caught. And when they get caught, then there's a whole part of whether they're going to tell on the rest of their organization or the rest of their crew, which is a whole another different aspect of this epidemic, because then it becomes, they commonly refer to them as rats, and I always hated that term. Never knew why somebody called it that, but it's kind of one of those cycles that people fall into, especially when they interact with law enforcement. So
now we've talked about all of the dangers of substance use, how to recognize it, how to look at it, and I'm not naive to think that no one is going to use substances because we talked about this. So I do want to give some space to talk about how to use in a safer way if that is the choice that you want to make. And I think this is Brandi's area of expertise, and I wanted to turn the floor over to you to talk on this subject.
On the subject, repeat that again. Sorry.
On the subject of using safely, if you're going
of
to
using
use the best
safely.
way to use safely to minimize some of the harm that could
Harm.
be.
Yeah. Well, there, we're still behind the times, unlike Canada, but Canada, they have like safe injection sites. I think there might be one or two coming around Baltimore or whatever, but having a buddy system is very important if you're going to continue to use fentanyl or heroin. So that way, if you do overdose, there's somebody there to use Narcan. Having Narcan, making sure that you do have Narcan. Harm reduction, entails all kinds of things. We were talking earlier about Challenges Inc. It's the only syringe service program in South Carolina. The laws are very ambiguous around syringe service programs, but so I think it was like 2016, the opioid epidemic had really hit, and Hep C had more than doubled in the state of South Carolina. And a lot of this was due to the opioid epidemic and IV use. And, a lot of times people are going to use the same needle over and over, or they're going to share needles. So making sure that people have, clean syringes, clean equipment, alcohol, clean cotton, anything that would transfer Hep C, HIV, some kind of bloodborne disease to someone else to reduce that. It also saves costs, like for hospitals. People a lot of times develop abscesses. I can't remember the exact amount that the state pays each year for just people who go to the ER that have abscesses from using needles. So, I mean, it puts a strain, economically. But definitely, in these times, a lot of times too, if you're going and just taking Xanax and you're like, hey, I'm just taking Xanax, it's going to be all right. Well, we live in the age of pressed pills, right? So that Xanax that you're taking might not be a Xanax. It could be fentanyl, you never know. And so it's just very important to kind of like, I guess if you're going to continue to use, to kind of know what it is that you are getting. But I think the most important thing really is, clean and safe equipment and using the buddy system. And then harm reduction in general too. I mean, there's so much available there for people who already have a physical dependence. And people have a hard time due to the physical sickness from coming off of opioids. And so, there's Suboxone, there's buprenorphine, there's Vivitrol, which is also for alcohol. There's the Sublocade shot, methadone. There's, alternatives to help. And one thing I want a clarification on, Miss Emily, too, because I think sometimes people get confused too with addiction and people who have like a physical dependence. I did want to ask you about that earlier, and I didn't get a chance to ask you if you would explain that, because I think some people get really confused. What's the difference between addiction and somebody that has an actual just physical dependence?
So the physical dependency is the body's response to it, right? So the body will need the substance, or it will go through some withdrawal symptoms. And in fact, you know, with the prescribing of opiates and Xanax, and there was a big influx of that over the last couple of decades, prior to there being more restrictions on it. Like, many people did actually go through some level of physical dependency. When you reach the level of addiction, it is basically where the using of the substance has become a preoccupation in your mind. So this shows up as like people spend a lot of time thinking about it, a lot of time getting it, acquiring it. So when we're thinking of physical dependency, we're talking about your body has acclimated to having this substance and change, where the addiction has more to do with the psychological ramifications of that, where you have obsessive thoughts, compulsions, and like you almost organize your life around use. Does that make sense? Another
Yeah,
thing,
it does to me.
yeah, another thing I wanted to hit up before we kind of close out, is that just ladies in general on a college campus, one of the things that you have to be super careful about is the dangers with sexual assault and abuse at your age, because substance use is one of the primary ways that sexual assault occurs. It happens in college age students. I'm sure y'all have heard of Rohypnol. Sometimes people spike your drink, so never leave a drink unattended. And if you are using substances in a party setting or other types of things, that buddy system is not just for opioids, but also for any type of party setting, because you never ever want to put yourself in a vulnerable position when you're under the influence and you're not able to defend yourself or get help. So I just want to make sure that y'all are aware of these things. They are something that are seen sometimes on college campuses, and you just have to be safe. So if you ever do have those, you ever do find yourself using stuff, just do so safely and keep yourself protected. I think that's all I had to share. I do have some resources that I want to share. I wanted to throw it back out to you guys if you have anything else you want to add before we close out.
I did just want to add this too. Alcohol is a drug. And I think that just because it's legal, people don't really, people are more concerned with like heavier drug use. And they kind of put alcohol like on the back burner. And, alcohol is a depressant. Alcohol, as we know, like, obviously driving drunk leads to the possibility of, having a wreck, hurting yourself, hurting someone else. I graduated upstate in 2017. I think it was 2016 where the 4 students were killed. Drinking was involved in that accident. I know one of the kids was on the track team, and that you drink to get that effect to like loosen up, but because it's poisonous, obviously the more you drink, that depressant effect is going to take place. And it can become very toxic. You could pass out, you could vomit, and you could choke on your own vomit. You have a less tolerance for pain when you're on alcohol, so accidents could happen that way. So I just always like to put that in there, because people don't usually think of alcohol as a drug, but it is a drug. It's classified as a drug. And there's a lot of dangers that surround alcohol as well as other substances. I just want to throw that out there.
I think that's really important, Brandi, because alcohol is involved in so many violent crime and motor vehicle accidents and other types of things. So, I mean, that is another way that that lives get put in danger. So I think that's a really important thing. Did anybody else have anything that they wanted to add before we wrap up? Did you students have any more questions that you wanted to ask? Okay, so I just want to remind y'all that Red Ribbon Week is October 23rd through October 31st. Here is the Red Ribbon Pledge. I thought about making y'all all recite it, but I'm gonna spare you. So it says, I pledge to grow up safe, healthy, and drug-free by understanding the dangers of drug use and abuse, respecting myself and being drug-free, spreading the word to family and friends about the importance of being healthy and drug-free. I did want to share with you guys some resources that you can access if you want to explore more. So these are Tom's resources, so I'm gonna have him like kind of tell you about them so that you know like what each site does.
The DEA has done a lot of work on this topic, and they on their website that you can go to justthinktwice.gov. They have educator lesson plans, they have interactive student resources, parent toolkits, workplace resources. I'm sorry, that's getsmartaboutdrugs.com. And then campusdrugprevention.gov provides college provides an ideal setting for innovation. There's actually a roadmap for college. And this thing that we do, the prevention professionals collaborate with a wide range of shareholders to address campus-wide drug misuse. They also have a drug fact sheet on their website, and there are various things in there about student athletes and opioids. Obviously, they're in pain, so they have to have the hard stuff, and some folks get hooked on it. Brett Favre with the Green Bay Packers was hooked on opioids for quite some time. He had to go to rehab about it. But they also have DEAdiversion.usdoj.gov and justthinktwice.gov and justpainkillers.com. These are all great resources that will help you to understand some of the things that you may have experienced or are going to experience, and how to deal with some of those things and how to combat some of those things. So thank you.
And then finally, guys, so I know you heard us talk about naloxone. So there are free providers out there that provide free naloxone, so that if anyone was to have an opiate overdose, with it being an opioid crisis, it's almost as important in this day and age that we live in as CPR training. Well, as important as CPR training, because it does save lives. And so these are just some of the places that you can go and get free naloxone. And even if you don't know anybody who is currently addicted to opiates or know your family is, you never know when this is going to come in handy on the street, or if you're out and about on campus, or other reasons why this might be helpful in an emergency situation. So I recommend that everybody carry one. I have one that I carry in my purse along with my CPR mask. I keep it at all times. And so I recommend that if you get an opportunity to go and grab one, to go do that.
And can I just add, I'm not gonna hold y'all long, I know y'all are ready to go, but with the community distributors, like it's really important to go get it. It is just as important as like someone who needs to carry around an EpiPen for them if they have an allergic reaction, like having naloxone on hand. You might be able to help someone in a Walmart parking lot or wherever the case may be, but just having it on board, it could really save someone's life.
And I just want to say too, to Miss Emily's students, that I worked with Emily for a short time, and like she is such a great teacher, and I really learned a lot from her. And anytime I'm feeling a certain way, I can reach out to her. She's so encouraging. Y'all have a great teacher. Y'all should be
Aw.
very blessed. I love her. She's one of my most favorite people. But I do appreciate you putting this together and allowing us the opportunity to speak to your class. And I appreciate you guys for taking the time to listen, you know, because for me, this is such a passion with substance use, because I've dealt with it, and I've had many friends die from this disease. My brother died from this disease. It's a horrible, horrible disease. And it's so important. And I just really appreciate you guys taking the time out of, you know, I know you're in class and you know, you got to come or whatever, but I still appreciate you guys taking the time to listen and being here.
I agree with that. And I worked with Miss Emily for a few years as well. And I totally have the same feedback that Brandi had. So yeah,
Oh, you guys are so sweet.
professor. And thank you all for coming. We appreciate it.
So thank you to all of my speakers. I really appreciate y'all showing up today. Your insights and your knowledge is invaluable. And like you guys said, I've known all of y'all and for a little bit of time. And, you know, I think you're all great. And one of the reasons that I reach out to you, because I'm like, I know who's great. So thank you, students, for showing up and hearing about our substance use presentation and being a part of our discussion. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their week.
Yes. See
Thank
y'all.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you guys.